I never thought I'd be standing in a police station at midnight watching my own mother get arrested. But there I was, wrapped in a blanket someone had draped over my shoulders, watching the woman who gave birth to me being led away in handcuffs. The detective kept asking if I was okay, if I needed anything, but I couldn't speak. I just kept thinking about the envelope, the one that had arrived 3 days ago that changed everything I thought I knew about my family. My name is Catherine Morrison, and I'm 38 years old. For most of my life, I believed I was the problem, the difficult daughter, the ungrateful child, the one who could never quite measure up to what my family expected. I spent decades trying to earn love that was never meant to be mine, trying to fix relationships that were designed to break me. And it almost worked. Almost. But before I tell you how I ended up here, watching my mother's arrest, I need to take you back to where it all started. Back to the moment when I first realized that something in my family was very, very wrong. This is Revenge Stories, a home for quiet courage and true endings. If you feel my words, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Help us build this community so we can bring more interesting and exciting stories for you from around the world. Your help is much appreciated. Your voice matters here. Your story matters too. It was a Tuesday morning in September when the letter arrived. I remember because Tuesdays were my favorite days. I'd wake up early, make myself a proper breakfast, and sit on my small apartment balcony, watching the city come alive. I worked hard for that apartment, saved for 3 years to afford the deposit, and every morning I sat there, I felt proud of what I'd accomplished on my own. The envelope was thin, official-looking, with a law firm's return address embossed in the corner. Chen and Associates. I didn't recognize the name. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it, that instinctive fear that comes when lawyers send you mail unexpectedly. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a notice of probate. My grandmother, Helen Morrison, had passed away 6 months ago. I stood there, the paper shaking in my hands, reading those words over and over. 6 months ago. My grandmother had been dead for 6 months, and nobody had told me. I hadn't spoken to my grandmother in almost 2 years, not because I didn't want to, but because my mother had made it clear that my presence upset her, that my visits made Grandma Helen confused and agitated. So I'd stayed away, believing I was doing the right thing, believing I was protecting her. But according to this letter, my grandmother had left me something in her will. A safety deposit box at Henderson First National Bank. Box number 273. And a key would be mailed to me separately within 5 business days. I called my mother immediately. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice tight and cold, the way it always was when she spoke to me. "Catherine, what do you want?" she said. "Mom, I just got a letter from a law firm about Grandma Helen. Why didn't anyone tell me she died?" There was a long pause. I could hear her breathing, could almost feel her calculating what to say. "We didn't want to upset you. You know how fragile you are. Besides, you hadn't bothered to visit her in years. We assumed you didn't care." The words hit me like they always did, sharp, precise, designed to make me feel guilty. And it worked. For about 30 seconds, I felt that familiar shame rising up, that voice in my head telling me I was selfish, that I should have tried harder, that this was my fault. But then something different happened, something that had never happened before. I got angry. "You told me not to visit her," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "You said my visits upset her. You said I made things worse. Don't you dare blame me for your own choices, Catherine. You always do this. You always make yourself the victim when you're just too self-centered to take responsibility for your own behavior." I hung up. I actually hung up on my mother. My hands were shaking, my heart pounding, but I'd done it, and instead of the crushing guilt I expected to feel, I felt something else. something that felt like the first breath of air after being underwater too long. The key arrived 4 days later, in a small padded envelope. It was old, brass, with the number 273 engraved on it. I held it in my palm, this tiny piece of metal that somehow felt heavy with possibility. Whatever my grandmother had left me, whatever was in that safety deposit box, my mother hadn't wanted me to have it. And that made me desperately want to know what it was. I went to the bank the next morning. Henderson First National was an old building downtown, the kind with marble floors and high ceilings that made you feel small. I presented my identification and the letter from the law firm to a woman at the customer service desk. She led me to a private room lined with metal boxes, found number 273, and used both my key and the bank's master key to open it. "Take all the time you need," she said, and left me alone. Inside the box was a large manila envelope, bulging with contents. My name was written across the front in my grandmother's shaky handwriting, Catherine Ann Morrison. My hands trembled as I lifted it out. I sat down at the small table in the room and opened the envelope. Inside were documents, dozens of them. Bank statements, legal papers, letters, photographs. And on top, a handwritten note from my grandmother, dated 8 months before her death. "My dearest Catherine, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm so sorry I didn't have the courage to tell you these things while I was alive. I'm sorry I let your mother convince me to stay silent. I'm sorry I failed you when you needed protection most. Everything in this envelope is the truth your mother has been hiding from you your entire life. Please read it all. Please believe it. And please, my darling girl, finally understand that you were never the problem. You were always loved. You were always enough. The lies your mother told you about yourself, they were never true. None of it was true. I'm so proud of the woman you've become, despite everything they did to destroy you. With all my love, Grandma Helen." My vision blurred with tears. I wiped my eyes and began going through the documents, one by one. And with each page I read, my entire understanding of my life shifted, cracked, and finally shattered completely. The first document was a birth certificate, mine. But the details were wrong. The mother's name listed wasn't Jennifer Morrison. It was someone named Sarah Chen. Father, unknown. Place of birth, Portland General Hospital. I stared at that certificate for a full minute, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. Sarah Chen, not Jennifer Morrison. My mother wasn't my biological mother. The next document explained everything. Adoption papers, dated 38 years ago. Jennifer and Robert Morrison had adopted me when I was 3 months old. A closed adoption through a private agency. The biological mother, Sarah Chen, had been 17 years old, unable to care for a child. I sat back in my chair, my mind spinning. I was adopted. My entire life, I'd been adopted, and nobody had ever told me. Every time I'd wondered why I looked so different from my sister Victoria, why I had dark hair and darker eyes when everyone else in the family was blonde and blue-eyed, why I never quite fit. This was why. But there was more, so much more. The next stack of papers were bank statements, an account in my name that I'd never known existed. It had been opened when I was 18, with an initial deposit of $50,000. Money from a trust fund my biological mother had set up for me before she died. She passed away when I was 16, killed in a car accident, but she'd made sure I'd be taken care of. Except I'd never received that money. The account showed regular withdrawals over the years, all authorized by Jennifer Morrison as my legal guardian. By the time I turned 25, the account was empty. $50,000. Gone. Money that should have been mine, that could have paid for college, that could have helped me start my life, stolen by the woman who'd adopted me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the papers. But I kept reading because I had to know everything. There were letters, dozens of them. Letters from my biological mother, Sarah. written to me before she died. Letters she'd left with my grandmother for safekeeping, to be given to me when I turned 18. Letters I'd never received. I opened the first one, my tears falling onto the page as I read. My darling Catherine, you're only a few months old as I write this, sleeping in your crib beside me. I'm 17, and I can't give you the life you deserve. But please know that giving you up is the hardest thing I'll ever do. I'm leaving you with the Morrison family because they promised to love you, to give you opportunities I can't provide. Your grandmother Helen promised to watch over you, to make sure you're cared for. I've set up a trust fund with everything I have. It's not much, but it's yours. For college, for your dreams, for whatever you need. Please use it to build a beautiful life. I love you more than words can say. You were wanted, you were cherished. Please never forget that. Your mother, Sarah. I sobbed in that small bank room, reading letter after letter from a woman who'd loved me, who'd sacrificed everything to give me a better life, who'd made sure I'd have resources when I needed them. A woman whose love had been stolen from me, whose gifts had been taken, whose very existence had been erased. But the most damning documents were still to come. At the bottom of the envelope was a diary, small, leather-bound, with Jennifer Morrison's name embossed on the cover. My grandmother had somehow gotten hold of it, and she'd marked certain pages with sticky notes. I opened to the first marked page, dated 37 years ago, just after I'd been adopted. The agency assured us this baby would be easy, a blank slate. No family history to complicate things. No relatives who'd come looking. Just a unwanted baby from a teenage mother who'll probably end up dead or in prison anyway. Robert thinks we should tell her eventually that she's adopted. He's such a fool. Why would we tell her that? Why give her any reason to think she's special or different? She needs to know her place in this family. Second, always second to Victoria. Victoria is everything I wanted in a daughter. Beautiful, blonde, mine. This adopted girl is just insurance. Someone to take care of us when we're old. Someone to make Victoria look even better by comparison. The calculated cruelty in those words stole my breath. This wasn't a mother writing about her child. This was someone describing an acquisition, a tool, something to be used. I turned to the next marked page, dated from when I was 8 years old. Catherine is becoming too confident, too independent. She needs to be reminded that she's lucky we even kept her. Today I told her the dress Victoria wore to the party was too nice for her, that she should be grateful for Victoria's hand-me-downs. She cried, which was good. She needs to learn humility. Page after page, year after year, Jennifer Morrison had documented her systematic destruction of my self-worth. It was all there, in her own handwriting. Every cruel comment, every calculated slight, every moment she'd made me feel small and unworthy. It had all been intentional. Planned. Part of a long-term strategy to keep me compliant, grateful, and unable to recognize that I was being abused. When I was 12, I'd won a scholarship to a prestigious summer arts program. I'd been so excited, so proud. I remembered showing my mother the acceptance letter, expecting her to be happy for me. Instead, she'd frowned and said, "Art isn't practical, Catherine. You're not talented enough to make a career of it anyway. We're not wasting our summer driving you back and forth." In her diary, she'd written, "Turned down Catherine's scholarship today. Can't let her get ideas above her station. Besides, Victoria needs new furniture for her room, and I'd rather spend the money on that." When I was 16 and my biological mother Sarah had died, Jennifer had written, "The teenage mother finally died. Good riddance." I destroyed all the letters she left for Catherine. No point in Catherine knowing that woman actually cared about her. Better, she thinks. Nobody wanted her except us. The hatred in those words was so pure, so concentrated, that I felt physically sick reading them. But there was one more document in that envelope. One more revelation that would change everything. It was a legal document, carefully folded and marked with my grandmother's final sticky note. On it, she'd written in shaky handwriting, "This is why I kept everything. This is why I finally found my courage." I unfolded the paper and read. It was a will. Jennifer and Robert Morrison's will, dated just 2 years ago. According to the document, everything they owned, their house, their savings, their investments, all of it would go to Victoria upon their deaths. I wasn't mentioned anywhere in the will. Not to inherit, not even to acknowledge my existence. But there was a strange codicil at the end, a clause stating that if I was still living in the family property at the time of their deaths, or if I could be proven to have any financial dependence on them, I would be responsible for their end-of-life care expenses and any debts they'd accumulated. I read that clause 3 times before I understood what it meant. They'd structured their will so that I would inherit nothing but would be legally responsible for their care and debts. I'd be obligated to pay, to sacrifice, to deplete whatever resources I'd managed to build on my own, and all of it would eventually go to Victoria anyway. It was the final insult, the ultimate expression of how they saw me. A tool, a resource, something to be used until empty, then discarded. I gathered all the documents, put them carefully back in the envelope, and walked out of that bank a different person than the one who'd walked in. The woman who had spent 38 years believing she was difficult, ungrateful, fundamentally flawed, she died in that room. In her place was someone who finally understood the truth. I wasn't the problem. I never had been. The problem was a woman who'd adopted a helpless baby and spent nearly 4 decades systematically destroying her for reasons I might never fully understand. That night, I sat in my apartment surrounded by those documents, and I made a decision. I wasn't going to be quiet anymore. I wasn't going to protect people who'd never protected me. I wasn't going to carry shame that had never been mine to carry. I was going to tell the truth, all of it. And I was going to make sure everyone knew exactly what Jennifer Morrison had done. I started with my sister. Victoria was 36, 2 years younger than me, and we'd never been close. How could we be? We'd been taught to compete for scraps of affection, trained to see each other as rivals rather than potential allies. But Victoria deserved to know the truth about our family. She deserved the chance to decide what to do with that knowledge. I called her the next morning. She answered with the same dismissive tone I'd heard my whole life. "Catherine, this is unexpected. What do you want?" "I need to see you, today, if possible." "There's something important I need to tell you about our family." She sighed dramatically. "I don't have time for whatever crisis you're manufacturing. Some of us have actual responsibilities." The old me would have apologized, would have backed down, would have accepted that dismissal as deserved. The new me sensed something different. "I found Grandma Helen's safety deposit box. I have documents, bank statements, Mom's diary, evidence of things that affect both of us. You can either meet me and see them, or you can find out the truth from a lawyer when I file criminal charges. Your choice." There was a long pause. "Criminal charges? Catherine, what are you talking about?" "Meet me at the cafe on Morrison Street in 2 hours. Bring your laptop. I have copies of everything, and you're going to want to see them." I hung up before she could argue. 2 hours later, I sat across from Victoria in a corner booth at the cafe. She looked polished as always, her blonde hair perfect, her designer clothes immaculate. She'd inherited our adoptive mother's looks, had always been the pretty one, the successful one, the one who did everything right. She set her laptop on the table and looked at me with barely concealed impatience. "This better be important, Catherine. I canceled a meeting for this." I slid the manila envelope across the table. "Read it, all of it. Then we'll talk." She opened the envelope and began going through the documents. I watched her face change as she read. confusion first, then shock, then something that looked like fear. "You're adopted," she whispered, looking up at me. "You're not my biological sister. Keep reading." She went through more pages, and I saw the moment she found the diary entries. Her face went pale, and her hands started shaking. "Mom wrote this? These things she said about you, about planning to break you down. This can't be real. This has to be fake." "It's real. Grandma Helen kept it. She knew what was happening, and she documented everything she could." Victoria read more, and I saw tears gathering in her eyes. She came to the bank statements showing my stolen trust fund, and she gasped softly. $50,000. She took it all. "Catherine, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know any of this." "Keep reading." "Get to the will." She found the document, read through it, and her face crumbled completely. "You get nothing but their debts, while I inherit everything." Oh my God. She pushed the laptop away and put her head in her hands. "I feel sick. All these years, the way they treated you, the way they made me treat you, telling me you were difficult and ungrateful, that you needed firm boundaries. They were training me to help them abuse you." I'd expected defensiveness, arguments, justifications. I hadn't expected this. I hadn't expected Victoria to see the truth so quickly, to accept it so completely. "I was awful to you," she said, tears streaming down her face now. "I did exactly what they wanted. I made fun of you. I competed with you. I dismissed your feelings. I was their weapon against you, and I didn't even know it." "You were 2 years younger than me," I said quietly. "You were trained the same way I was." "Just trained for a different role. That's okay. That doesn't make it okay." She wiped her eyes, smearing her perfect makeup. "What are you going to do? Are you really going to press charges?" "I'm going to the police this afternoon. Financial fraud, theft, emotional abuse. I have documentation for all of it. The bank can verify the trust fund withdrawals. Grandma Helen's lawyer will testify about the will. This isn't just family drama, Victoria. These are crimes." She nodded slowly, and then she said something that shocked me. "I want to help. I'll testify. I'll tell them everything I remember about how they treated you, every instance I witnessed, every time they manipulated me into hurting you. I'll tell the truth." "Why?" I asked, genuinely confused. "You're set to inherit everything. If I press charges, if this goes public, your inheritance could be affected. You could lose everything they promised you." "Break." Victoria laughed, but it was a broken sound with no humor in it. "You know what I realized reading these documents? I don't want their money. I don't want anything from them. They raised me to be their perfect doll, their showcase daughter. Do you know how many times I tried to talk to Mom about my actual feelings? About being overwhelmed or scared or unsure? She'd just say, 'We don't have those problems in this family, Victoria. Smile and be grateful.' She looked at me with red eyes. They damaged both of us, Catherine, just in different ways. You got the overt abuse, I got the covert kind, being molded into someone who'd carry on their legacy of cruelty. I don't want to be that person anymore. I want to help make this right." We spent the next 3 hours going through everything together, Victoria adding her own memories of incidents that now made horrible sense in context. The time I'd been sick with the flu, and our mother refused to let me stay home from school, saying I was being dramatic. Victoria remembered her saying in private, "Catherine needs to learn the world won't accommodate her weakness." The time I'd saved money for months to buy a used laptop for school, and our mother had pressured me to give the money to Victoria for her senior trip instead. Victoria had thought I'd offered willingly. She'd had no idea I'd been coerced, shamed, and guilted into it. Instance after instance, Victoria's memories filled in gaps in the picture, providing more evidence of systematic, calculated abuse spanning decades. By the time we left that cafe, we'd become something we'd never been allowed to be before. Actual sisters, allies, 2 women who'd been damaged by the same people in different ways, coming together to demand justice. The police detective who took my report was a woman in her 50s named Detective Sarah Williams. She listened to my entire story, reviewed the documents I brought, and her expression grew darker with each page. "Ms. Morrison," she said when I finished, "what you're describing is criminal financial exploitation. The trust fund theft alone is prosecutable. Combined with the evidence in this diary and the witness testimony you're offering, we have grounds for multiple charges." "What happens next?" I asked. "We open an investigation. We'll need to interview witnesses, verify these documents with the bank and your grandmother's lawyer, build a complete case. This kind of investigation typically takes several weeks to several months. I want you to be prepared for that timeline." I nodded. "I've waited 38 years for the truth. I can wait a little longer for justice." "There's one more thing you should know," Detective Williams said carefully. "Once this investigation becomes official, once we start interviewing witnesses and subpoenaing records, your family will find out. They'll know you reported them. Are you prepared for their response?" I thought about the diary entries, about my stolen trust fund, about a lifetime of calculated cruelty. I thought about the will that would leave me with nothing but their debts. "Yes," I said firmly, "I'm prepared." What I wasn't prepared for was how quickly my mother would respond, or how vicious that response would be. The police contacted Jennifer Morrison for an interview 3 days after I filed my report. I wasn't there, but Detective Williams told me later what happened. Jennifer had arrived at the police station with a lawyer, calm and composed. She denied everything. The diary was fabricated, she claimed. The trust fund was used for my benefit, just on things I didn't remember or appreciate. The will was structured that way because I was financially irresponsible and they were trying to protect me from myself. She'd been convincing, Detective Williams said. Poised, articulate, playing the role of wounded mother perfectly. If they hadn't had the physical evidence, the original documents, the bank records, Jennifer might have talked her way out of everything. But they had the evidence. And when confronted with it, when shown her own handwriting in the diary, her own signature on the fraudulent bank withdrawals, something in Jennifer Morrison snapped. According to the report, she'd stood up, looked directly at Detective Williams, and said something chilling. "Catherine was always a mistake. I should have left her at that agency. She's been nothing but trouble since the day we brought her home. Ungrateful, difficult, determined to paint herself as a victim. Well, if she wants to play victim, I'll give her something real to cry about." She'd walked out of the interview, and 20 minutes later, I started getting calls. The first call came from my landlord. Someone had contacted him, claiming to be my mother, saying I was mentally unstable and a danger to myself and others. She'd told him I'd been hospitalized multiple times, that I had a history of making false accusations against family members, that he should consider evicting me before I caused problems for other tenants. My landlord, thankfully, called me directly instead of just believing her. "Miss Morrison, I got a very disturbing call today. I wanted to hear your side before taking any action." I explained everything: the police investigation, the evidence, my mother's pattern of manipulation. I offered to have Detective Williams call him to verify my story. He agreed, apologized for bothering me, and said he'd document the harassment. The second call came from my employer. The HR director wanted to see me immediately. When I arrived at her office, her face was grave. "Catherine, we received an anonymous complaint about you this morning. Very serious allegations about theft, dishonesty, and mental instability. The email included what appears to be medical records." My stomach dropped. "Medical records? What kind of medical records?" She turned her computer screen toward me. There, in an email sent from an untraceable account, were documents that looked official. Psychiatric evaluations, diagnosing me with borderline personality disorder, narcissistic tendencies, and a pattern of making false accusations against family members. Hospital admission records for suicide attempts I'd never made. Notes from therapists I'd never seen. All of it was fake. Expertly fabricated but completely fake. "These aren't real," I said, my voice shaking. "I've never been hospitalized. I've never had these diagnoses. Someone is creating false documents to destroy my credibility." The HR director studied my face carefully. I thought it seemed suspicious. The email address was anonymous, and the timing is convenient, given that you just requested time off for personal matters. But I needed to address it formally. I told her about the police investigation, about my mother's threats. I gave her Detective Williams's contact information and permission to verify everything I was saying. She made the call right then, with me sitting across from her. After a 10-minute conversation, she hung up and looked at me with something like awe. Detective Williams confirmed everything. She also said this kind of retaliation is common in these cases. She's documenting each instance. The HR director paused. "Catherine, I want you to know you have the company's full support. We take harassment seriously, especially harassment designed to interfere with someone's employment. Period." The calls continued throughout the day. My bank, my insurance company, my dentist, even the yoga studio I'd started attending. Jennifer Morrison was systematically contacting every institution in my life, spreading lies designed to destroy my reputation and credibility. Period. But she'd made a crucial mistake. She'd done it while under active police investigation. Every call, every false document, every lie was now evidence of witness tampering and harassment. She was building the case against herself. Period. Victoria called me that evening, her voice panicked. Period. "Catherine, Mom knows I testified. She called me screaming, saying I betrayed the family, that I'm throwing away my inheritance for nothing. She said terrible things. Period. Things I can't even repeat." I recorded the conversation. "I thought you might need it, and I sent it to Detective Williams," I said. "Everything your mother says or does right now is evidence." "There's something else," Victoria said, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. "She told me she has a plan. She wouldn't say what it was, but the way she said it, Catherine, she sounded dangerous, like she's past caring about consequences. I think you need to be careful." I thanked Victoria for the warning, but I didn't fully understand what she meant until 2 nights later. I'd fallen asleep on my couch watching television, exhausted from the constant stress of my mother's harassment campaign. I woke up suddenly, around 2 in the morning, to the smell of smoke. For a confused moment, I thought I'd left something on the stove. Then I realized the smoke was coming from outside my apartment door, and I could hear the fire alarm in the hallway blaring. I ran to the door and touched it. The surface was hot. There was fire in the hallway. I called 911, grabbed my phone and the envelope of documents I'd been keeping in my apartment, and ran to the window. I lived on the 2nd floor. There was a fire escape, but I'd never used it. Had barely looked at it beyond noting it existed. The smoke was getting thicker, seeping under my door. I could hear people shouting in the hallway, running, panicking. I shoved the window open and climbed onto the fire escape, the metal cold under my bare feet. The ladder was one of those that requires you to release a catch to make it extend down to the ground. In my panic, I couldn't figure out how to release it. The smoke was billowing out of windows now. I could hear sirens approaching, but they seemed impossibly far away. Finally, I just jumped. It was only about 10 feet, but I landed wrong, felt something in my ankle give way with a sharp pop of pain. I crawled away from the building, dragging my injured foot, clutching the envelope against my chest. Fire trucks arrived, their lights painting everything red and blue. Firefighters swarmed the building. Other residents were gathering on the street, some in pajamas, some wrapped in blankets, all of us watching our home burn. A paramedic tried to check my ankle, but I refused to let go of the envelope. "These documents, I need them safe. Please, they're evidence in a police investigation. They can't get damaged." The paramedic, a kind-faced woman about my age, carefully took the envelope and sealed it in a plastic evidence bag. "I'll personally hand this to the fire inspector, okay? Now, let me look at that ankle." It was broken, badly, "I'd need surgery," the paramedic said. But I'd gotten out alive, which was more than could be said for Mrs. Chen on the third floor, who'd inhaled too much smoke and collapsed in the hallway. She'd been rushed to the hospital, but the paramedics' faces were grim. The fire inspector approached me an hour later as I sat in the back of an ambulance, my ankle wrapped and splinted, waiting to be transported to the hospital. "Miss Morrison? I'm Inspector Rodriguez. The fire started right outside your apartment door. Accelerant was used, gasoline, we think. Someone started this fire deliberately, and you were the target." Detective Williams arrived at the hospital while I was being prepped for surgery. She sat beside my bed, her expression a mixture of sympathy and cold anger. "We have security footage from your building," she said. "Jennifer Morrison was there tonight, at 1:45 a.m. She can be seen entering the building, going to your floor, and leaving 12 minutes later, 4 minutes before the fire started. We've arrested her for arson and attempted murder." The words didn't seem real. My mother had tried to kill me, had actually set fire to my building, endangering everyone who lived there, in an attempt to destroy the evidence I had against her and eliminate me completely. Mrs. Chen died 3 days later from smoke inhalation. The charge against Jennifer Morrison was upgraded to felony murder. My mother had killed someone, an innocent 72-year-old woman who'd done nothing except live in the same building as me. The trial, when it finally happened 6 months later, was both surreal and cathartic. I sat in that courtroom with my ankle still in a walking boot, even after surgery and months of physical therapy, and watched Jennifer Morrison face justice. The prosecutor presented the evidence methodically. The trust fund theft, documented with bank records showing Jennifer's signature authorizing withdrawals from an account I didn't know existed. My biological mother Sarah's letters that Jennifer had destroyed, their existence confirmed by my grandmother's testimony in sworn affidavits taken before her death. The diary, analyzed by handwriting experts who confirmed it was genuine, written by Jennifer Morrison over the course of decades, entry after entry detailing her calculated abuse, her strategies for breaking my spirit, her contempt for the child she'd adopted. The false medical records she'd created and distributed to my landlord and employer. The fake psychiatric evaluations. The witness tampering. All of it carefully documented and presented to the jury. Victoria testified, and her testimony was devastating. She described growing up watching me be treated differently, being encouraged to see me as competition, being rewarded when she was cruel to me, and punished when she showed me kindness. She described our mother's rage when she learned Victoria had spoken to the police, the threats, the manipulation. Detective Williams testified about Jennifer's behavior during the investigation, about the threats she'd made, her escalating harassment, her promise to give me something real to cry about. And then there was the security footage from my apartment building. Jennifer Morrison, clearly visible in the camera, entering the building with a bag, taking the stairs to my floor, pausing outside my door, leaving exactly 12 minutes later without the bag, the smoke starting 4 minutes after she left. The fire inspector testified about the accelerant found at the scene, about the burn patterns that proved the fire had been deliberately set directly outside my door, about Mrs. Chen's death, about the other residents who'd been injured or traumatized. Jennifer Morrison's lawyer tried to argue mental illness, emotional breakdown, a devoted mother pushed too far by an ungrateful daughter's accusations. But the diary destroyed that defense. You couldn't claim momentary insanity when you'd been documenting your abuse for decades. You couldn't claim you snapped when you'd been planning and calculating for 38 years. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. They found Jennifer Morrison guilty on all counts: fraud, theft, witness tampering, arson, and felony murder. The judge sentenced her to 25 years to life. Given her age, 63 at sentencing, it was effectively a life sentence. As the bailiff led her away, Jennifer looked at me one final time. There was no remorse in her eyes, no recognition of what she'd done, just cold calculation and something that might have been satisfaction, as if even in defeat, she believed she'd won something. I realized then that she'd never see me as a real person, never understand that she'd taken an innocent baby who deserved love and protection and spent decades trying to destroy her for reasons that probably weren't even rational. She was broken in ways that couldn't be fixed, and I'd spent my whole life paying the price for her brokenness. But not anymore. My biological father turned out to be findable eventually. Sarah Chen had left information about him in the letters my grandmother saved. His name was Marcus Lee, and he'd been Sarah's high school boyfriend. He joined the military right after graduation, hadn't known Sarah was pregnant, had spent decades not knowing he had a daughter. When I contacted him, when I told him who I was and showed him proof, he cried. Actual tears streaming down his face as he looked at photographs of Sarah, the girl he'd loved, and our daughter who looked so much like her. I loved her, he told me, his voice breaking. I wanted to marry her after my service ended. I wrote to her constantly, but she stopped responding after about a year. I thought she'd met someone else, moved on. I never knew why she stopped writing. Sarah had stopped writing because she was pregnant, because her parents had kicked her out, because she was struggling to survive and didn't want to burden him with her problems. She'd made an adoption plan, set up the trust fund, written those letters, and then died in a car accident before I turned 18. Marcus and I built a relationship slowly, carefully. He showed me pictures of Sarah, told me stories about her, helped me understand the woman who'd given birth to me. She'd been funny, creative, fiercely independent. She'd loved to paint, wanted to be an artist. She'd given me up because she wanted me to have opportunities she couldn't provide, but she'd never stopped loving me. She would be so proud of you, Marcus said when I told him about standing up to Jennifer, about pressing charges, about refusing to be silenced. Sarah never backed down from anyone. That strength you showed, that came from her. I started going to therapy regularly, working through decades of trauma with a specialist who understood familial abuse. It was hard work, painful work, but necessary work. I learned that I'd been conditioned to accept abuse as love, to see my own needs as selfish, to believe I was fundamentally unworthy. Unlearning those beliefs took time. There were days I backslid, days I caught myself automatically apologizing for things that weren't my fault, days I felt guilty for taking up space in the world. But slowly, with help, I began to reconstruct my sense of self around truth instead of lies. Victoria and I became actually close, the way sisters should be. She'd cut off all contact with our adoptive father, Robert, who'd tried to defend Jennifer's actions, claiming she'd been under stress, that I'd provoked her. Victoria had been clear. You watched her abuse Catherine for 38 years and did nothing. You're just as guilty. I want nothing to do with you. She'd refused her inheritance too. When Robert died 2 years after Jennifer's conviction, leaving everything to Victoria, she donated the entire estate to organizations that help adopted children and survivors of family abuse. I don't want their money, she told me firmly. I want to make sure what happened to us doesn't happen to other kids. I used the settlement money from the civil suit I filed against Jennifer's estate to buy a house. Not a mansion, not something elaborate, just a simple 3-bedroom house with a garden. The first home I'd ever owned, bought with money that was rightfully mine, money that represented justice. I planted flowers in that garden, roses, like my biological mother Sarah had loved, lavender because my grandmother Helen used to keep sachets of it in her dresser, and sunflowers because they reminded me to turn toward the light, to grow despite everything that had tried to stunt me. I started volunteering with an organization that helps adopted children navigate their relationships with adoptive families, particularly in cases where those relationships are abusive. I shared my story at speaking events, wrote articles, helped draft legislation to better protect adopted children's rights to information about their biological families and inheritance. Every person I helped understand they weren't the problem, that they deserved better, that abuse doesn't become acceptable just because it comes from family, felt like a small victory against the decades I'd spent believing I was worthless. 5 years after Jennifer's conviction, I got a letter from her. It was brief, written in her still precise handwriting. "Catherine, I'm dying. Pancreatic cancer. I have maybe 3 months. I wanted you to know that I don't regret anything I did. You were supposed to be grateful. You were supposed to know your place. Instead, you destroyed our family. I hope you're happy." I read it once, put it in a drawer, and never responded. She wanted my reaction, wanted to hurt me one more time before she died. I refused to give her that satisfaction. Jennifer Morrison died in prison 6 weeks later. I didn't attend her funeral. Victoria didn't either. Robert went alone, buried his wife without any other family present, a fitting end for a woman who'd spent her life destroying the people closest to her. I'm 43 years old now. 5 years past the worst trauma of my life. 25 years into building a life based on truth instead of lies. I'm not the same person I was when that letter arrived from my grandmother. That Catherine, the one who believed she was the problem, who accepted abuse as normal, who thought she deserved nothing better, she's gone. In her place is someone stronger. Someone who knows her worth isn't determined by other people's inability to see it. Someone who understands that family is supposed to protect and nurture, and when it doesn't, you're not obligated to pretend otherwise. I have a chosen family now. Marcus, my biological father, who visits every few weeks and is teaching me to paint the way he taught Sarah so many years ago. Victoria, my sister by choice now rather than by obligation, who's become my closest friend and ally. Detective Williams, who helped me find justice and who I still meet for coffee every month. Friends I've made who know my whole story and love me not despite it, but because of the strength it taught me. A partner, Emma, who I met at one of my speaking events, who understands trauma and healing because she's walked her own version of that path. I still have hard days. Days when I hear Jennifer's voice in my head telling me I'm worthless. Days when I catch myself about to apologize for existing. Days when the old conditioning rises up and tries to make me small again. But I have tools now. Therapy, support, people who genuinely care about me. And I have the truth, documented and undeniable. I wasn't the problem. I never was. This is Revenge Stories, a home for quiet courage and true endings. If you feel my words, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Help us build this community so we can bring more interesting and exciting stories for you from around the world. Your help is much appreciated. Your voice matters here. Your story matters too. If you're watching this and you recognize yourself in my story, if you've been told your whole life that you're the problem, that you're too sensitive, too difficult, too ungrateful, please hear me when I say this. You're not the problem. Your perceptions are valid. Your feelings matter, and you deserve so much better than what you're getting. Family abuse is real, even when it doesn't leave physical scars. Financial exploitation is real. Emotional manipulation is real. And none of it becomes acceptable just because it comes from people who share your DNA or who raised you. You're allowed to protect yourself. You're allowed to tell the truth. You're allowed to demand justice. You're allowed to walk away from people who hurt you, even if those people are your parents. It's not betrayal, it's survival. And surviving, choosing yourself, refusing to be destroyed, that's not selfish. That's the strongest, bravest thing you can do. I spent 38 years believing I was worthless. I was wrong. And if you believe that about yourself, you're wrong too. You matter. Your story matters. Your pain is real. And so is your right to heal from it. The family I saved was myself, and I'm not ashamed of that. I'm proud of it. That envelope that arrived from my grandmother, it didn't just give me evidence. It gave me permission. Permission to see the truth, to believe my own experiences, to fight back against people who'd spent decades convincing me I had no right to fight. My grandmother, Helen Morrison, spent years watching me be abused and did nothing, too afraid of her daughter to intervene. But in the end, she found her courage. She documented everything she could, saved what evidence existed, and made sure I'd eventually have access to the truth. That was her final gift to me. Not money or property, though the trust fund she helped me recover certainly helped. The real gift was validation. Proof that I wasn't crazy, wasn't imagining things, wasn't the villain in my own story. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is tell the truth. Even when it costs you everything. Even when it makes you the villain in other people's stories. Even when it means standing alone against people who are supposed to love you. I told the truth. I demanded justice. I refused to protect people who'd never protected me. And I would do it all again. Because I finally understand something I spent decades not knowing. I was always worth protecting. I was always worth fighting for. I was always deserving of love and respect and basic human dignity. Not because I earned it or proved myself or became perfect, but because I'm a person. And that's enough. It was always enough. Jennifer Morrison tried to destroy me because she couldn't accept that I was more than the role she assigned me. She needed me to be broken, dependent, grateful for scraps. When I refused to stay in that role, when I grew strong enough to leave, she escalated until she was literally trying to murder me. But she failed. I survived. And I didn't just survive, I thrived. This house I'm sitting in as I record this, it's mine. Bought with money that was always supposed to be mine. Money my biological mother set aside to give me opportunities. The garden outside where flowers bloom, that's mine too. The life I've built, the relationships I've chosen, the peace I've found, all mine. Jennifer Morrison is dead, her reputation destroyed, her crimes exposed, her final years spent in prison where she belonged. Robert Morrison is alone, estranged from both his daughters, living with the consequences of enabling decades of abuse. And me? I'm free, truly, completely free in ways I never thought possible. That's real revenge. Not violence or cruelty or stooping to their level. Just living well. Just building a beautiful life from the ruins they left behind. Just refusing to let their cruelty define me. I want to say something to everyone watching who's in a similar situation. Everyone who's been told they're the problem, who's been gaslit and manipulated and convinced they're crazy. Trust yourself. Your instincts are probably right. If something feels wrong, it probably is wrong. You're not imagining it. You're not being too sensitive. You're not overreacting. Document everything. Keep records, save messages, take photos, write down what happens when it happens. You might need that evidence someday. Tell someone, anyone, a friend, a therapist, a teacher, a coworker. Break the silence. Abusers depend on your silence, on your shame, on your belief that no one will believe you. Prove them wrong. And most importantly, you are allowed to save yourself. You're allowed to put your own well-being first. You're allowed to walk away from toxic people, even if those people are family. Blood doesn't obligate you to accept abuse. Being raised by someone doesn't mean you owe them unlimited access to hurt you. Love that comes with conditions, with manipulation, with the constant threat of withdrawal if you don't comply, that's not real love. Real love is what my biological mother Sarah showed me in those letters. Wanting the best for me even when it meant giving me up. Setting aside money for my future, even though she'd never see me benefit from it. Writing words of love and encouragement, hoping I'd read them someday and know I was wanted. Real love is what my grandmother Helen showed me, by finally finding her courage, by documenting the truth, by making sure I'd have evidence to protect myself. Real love is what Victoria showed me, by choosing truth over inheritance, by standing with me against the people who raised us both. Real love is what Emma shows me every day by seeing all of me, the damaged parts and the healed parts and the still healing parts, and choosing me anyway. That's what love looks like. Not control, not manipulation, not conditions and threats and constant criticism designed to keep you small. I wish I could go back and tell 8-year-old Catherine, the one sitting alone in the kitchen while her family celebrated without her, that none of it was her fault, that she was worthy of love exactly as she was, that the people who should have protected her were the broken ones, not her. I can't do that, but I can tell you, whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever family situation you're struggling with, you're worthy, you're enough, you deserve better, and it's not too late to save yourself. Jennifer Morrison tried to make me disappear. First, psychologically, erasing my sense of self until I believed I was nothing. Then literally burning down my building to destroy me and the evidence of her crimes. She failed. I'm still here. Stronger, clearer, more certain of my worth than ever before. That's what real survival looks like. Not just escaping, but building something beautiful from the ashes they tried to bury you in. I survived. I healed. I thrived.